Okay, we're live again. Um,
Welcome back, everybody.
yeah. So the question was about rites of passage and stuff, and basically, I mean, first of all, I agree that they were an instrumental part in many traditional or ancient cultures, and I think many reasons why they've kind of dissipated, but one certainly has to be that uh, we've become so, as a result of technological advancement, partially we've become so comfortable that it seems as though perhaps they're less necessary. But I would say the kind of pervasive or accessible comfort has actually made conscious, intentional discomfort even more important, because it's such an integral aspect of character that if you're not getting it naturally, you should be injecting it, quote unquote, unnaturally or intentionally. And I think, part of the reason, one of the things I mentioned after you had dropped out, but like one of the reasons why we have, a lot of 40-year-old teenagers in the world is partially because of that, because, the whole life has been very padded and hasn't been confronted with the right type of adversity. And I think what rites of passage do is not only deliver that adversity, but also as you're developing, knowing that you're going to be confronting something like that, it helps you orient your development and, your skills and that kind of stuff in preparation for that type of a goal. And then it acts as a demarcation point for saying, after this point, you're an adult. After this point, you're going to be expected to act a certain way. After this point, you're going to be expected to take on certain responsibilities. And that's traditionally been kind of the purpose of rites of passage or coming of age ceremonies or initiations of various kinds. And so I think in this world that we've been kind of describing, this more integrated world, this more sane, thoughtful world, they will be brought back in many respects. I mean, I know I've had this conversation with a lot of Bitcoiners, and they definitely want to, they definitely want their offspring to be exposed to certain rites of passage for the benefit that it will accrue to their character in many ways. And I think they'll once again become an integral part of the different cultures that emerge out of the era that we're currently in. So I think they're super important. And to the extent that we have them kind of passively today, they're not as ritualized and they're not as identified as rites of passage, but certainly some people seek them out. And I think, you can do the hand in the fire ant thing, and you can do the ordeal poisons, and you can do the, drop someone off a week in the jungle and see if they survive. But those are all kind of intense and maybe not super appropriate. But I do think combat sports are a really good one, because they help to develop a skill, they help to build character, they help to build humility, they help to build community with other people that are working towards something, and you develop those kind of bonds of camaraderie and brotherhood or sisterhood or whatever. So I think that's a great way. And I definitely wish I had gotten involved in that stuff earlier. For one reason, because there wasn't much, certainly physical adversity. I played sports and stuff growing up, but again, like I wish there had been rites of passage when I was younger. But also I really enjoy them, both for the physicality of them and for the component of character building. Like I come out of the gym many days after jujitsu, and I'm like, kind of, I have to get back to a place where I'm cool, because I'll come out and like if I didn't do well that day, or if I got beat up or whatever, I'll feel bad. I'll be like, fuck, like I fucked up, and then I have to kind of talk to myself a bit and be like, what are you talking about? You didn't, like, you're in the practice room and you're learning a skill, and you got beat up by someone who's been doing it for like 10 years longer than you. You didn't. This is not something you need to be down about. You just need to see what you can learn from the experience and show up again the next day and do it again. And like, and cultivating the proper perspective to encounter those sorts of things is tremendously valuable. And so I think, and this is what's kind of cool about the reemergence of combat sports. I've been a UFC fanatic for, well, how long has it been? Probably like 15 years. I don't know when the first Ultimate Fighter came out, or when like the Griffin Bonner, that famous fight, happened, but it was probably like close to 15 years ago. And so I've been a huge fan, and obviously it's becoming a bigger and bigger sport in the world, and more people are practicing martial arts of various kinds. And I think that's a good thing. And I think it kind of speaks to this desire to inject that type of adversity into people's lives for all the benefits that it represents, you know, both physical, physiological, psychological, character, community. Like, it ticks a lot of boxes, and it introduces a type of adversity that I think we've lost. You know, we often talk about the fiat era being soft, right? And about kind of society in the world today being so soft that it's, you know, look what happened the last 2 years. And I think there's a yearning for, well, to not be so soft, and perhaps a recognition that that's not the optimal way of being, that there's something fundamental that's missing. And it seems like a lot of people are turning to combat sports to help, or to explore ways of maybe filling up that gap. And I'm a huge supporter, and it's a big part of my life. So I'm down with it.
Yeah, that's it. Like when my kids were little, it was like, we got to get them involved, you know, with something. Because, you know, with the homeschooling thing and homesteading, we're out in the middle of nowhere. One of the bigger questions that a lot of people ask is, well, what do you do about socialization? Right. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, there's two sides to that coin. And I would say on the negative side, it's like, well, you know, do you just send your kid to the school because that's where all the other kids are? And then what happens to your kid when they get mixed in with a bunch of shitty kids? Right. It's like, I mean, like shitty in like any which way you want to take that. You know what I mean? Like some of these like Play-Doh kids, you know what I mean? Like they're just like, they're built out of Play-Doh. It's like they're just this malleable thing. They just go where you push them. And then it's just like, they're just like, I'm here now. And then my mom says that I got to go do this now. And then I go over here and I do this now. And then when they stop at the store with this, I tell the clown with the thing, I could shove the food in my face, and then I go home and I go to sleep. Right. It's like, okay, that kid's he's just gonna mush his way through life. And I don't want my kid, not that I don't want my kid around that kid, but it's like, I don't want that behavior rubbing off on my kid. Right. It's like, I have a responsibility to my kid. And at the same token, I don't want, you know, some shitty little kid who's getting bullied at home or by other kids, like taking his anger out on my kids and everything else. So I kind of thought, well, you know, when it comes to socialization, what society would you like your kid to be part of? And so we place them in places where they can learn a skill, right? And do a thing, right? So it's like, oh, there's music class. Like, let's get you involved in this music thing if you're involved, if you want to be involved in this thing. And both my kids just took to Taekwondo, like, boom. And it's kind of the only game in town where we're at. And it's awesome, right? They've got a great teacher. The guy is super nice. I mean, like, if this guy, like, if you didn't know, it's like one of those things, right? Like, you don't even need to know. This guy could just bust you up in like 1,000 different ways, but you'd think like, it's like this grandpa looking guy. And it's like, you know, 3rd degree black belt, maybe we're just not gonna fuck with this guy. Yeah, right. It's like he goes away on vacation and comes back all busted up with a black eye. And it's like, where the hell were you at? You know, like that sort of shit. It's like, he's a super awesome guy, nothing but the best, right? But like, it got my kids involved, and you know, at first you go, I guess most people's first instinct is like, well, what happens if they get hit? And it's like, that's kind of what's going to happen here. Like, you're gonna, you know, when they're little, right? They're gonna spar a little bit, and everybody's got pads and helmets and all this other whatnot. But like, my son's a red belt at this point. It's like, it's kind of like a little bit of no joke anymore. You know what I mean? Like, you go to a tournament and it's like, those kids don't know you, and you have to fight a kid that's bigger than you, and you have to fight, you know, like in some cases, like depending upon the tournament, you're fighting adults. You know what I mean? Like, it's like contact, right? But like, fair enough. But hey, you have to, even if you're doing like a weapons form or some shit like that, it's like, you have to present yourself professionally in front of people who know exactly what this is supposed to look like. And this goes back to the truth. Like, if you're in front of like 5 black belts and they know exactly what this form is supposed to look like, and you don't perform it well, you're going to find out. And no, you know, mom and dad aren't going to be there to say, it's okay, you did your, you know what I mean? Like, well, you know, maybe they have a different interpretation of the way it's supposed to be. Hey, you either have a trophy or you don't. Right? It's like, you either won the fight or you didn't, right? Like, we all know, like, you watch the UFC, man. Like, I remember seeing those, like, the first ones. Like, first UFC, when it was like
Yeah.
no holds barred, you know, you got dudes getting teeth kicked out and everything else, right? Like all that stuff, like early. And I was like, what is this nightmare? But there's no lying to it, right? Like if you
Yeah.
you take 3 elbows to the head and like you're now not a conscious person, there's a truth in that. You fucked up, right?
Totally.
It's like,
The slogan of the UFC is as real as it gets. It's perfect, right? I mean, it's like, it's real as it fucking gets. 2 people go in and the truth is revealed.
exactly. And so to watch that sport evolve, and like my kids and I, we sit, and my, you know, our whole family, we sit and we'll watch. And it's like, just to see in just like the last few years, right? Like somebody comes up with a game where you go, oh, wait a minute, that's a new thing, right?
Yeah.
Like this leg kick game, right? It's like when that low leg kick came in, it was like
Calf
nobody
kicks,
thought
yeah.
like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna whack you right here. And it's like, I remember sitting and going like, what the fuck does that do? And then like 2 rounds later, you go, oh, that's what that does. And it's like, oh, that's an interesting new thing that you know, somebody had to come up with that, right? You're constantly looking at the jujitsu schools or whatever, and it's like, man, they always innovating. And I always try to like put that into, you know, hey kid, check this out. You think you got something crazy going on? Look at this guy. Like, look what this guy figured out, right? Like there's but again, there's a truth in that. And I think as, you know, to like a passage rite, I think knowing what you're made of is super important to people. And I think
Yeah.
whether it's a child or whether it's an adult, you should walk into that and see what you're made of. The thing is, it should be voluntary, right? Obviously, right? You don't want to enforce that on, you know, it shouldn't say like, hey kid, you're going to go do this. I never did that. I was like, hey, you want to, you know, my wife and I were like, hey, there's a Taekwondo class. You guys want to check it out? And at the time my son was into it. My daughter, she was like, no, I don't have any interest. And she was pretty little at the time anyway, but he's been at it for, I don't know, 7 years, something like that. And it's like,
Yeah.
three times a week, Taekwondo, right? It's like you've got this going on, then this going on, then, you know, we have a schedule, and you go and to watch them get better, and to watch them, you know, figure out a new technique, figure out like, oh, there's my son is always in this like this back and forth battle with this other, like this black belt in his class, and it's like they put him against each other, and sometimes he comes out on top and sometimes the other one comes out on top, but at the end of it, it's always respect, and it's always I want to do this again, right? Like, I think, like, get me back in there. Let me try this again. It didn't work. What I did last time didn't work, but damn it, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to try to find a way to feint here and strike here and do a thing. And I think like kids crave that shit. And it's like,
It's a great way
do.
to channel like the type of energy that they have, for sure. You know, and I kind of go back and forth because like I'm an incredibly staunch believer that like you need something physical, like a physical challenge or physicality struggle in your life, like whether you're a developing kid or whether you're an adult, like, you know, and I romanticize it by thinking about like the days of Plato, right? And like him and all the homies would just wrestle each other and beat the shit out of each other and then go and like, you know, sit on the marble terrace and talk about philosophy, you know, and like,
right,
and,
yeah, when
and,
you're
and,
all exhausted, that's when you have time to think, right? Like you have that moment of clarity after like rolling for a bit, and
right.
you're like, yeah, like that's why kids need recess, right? Like let them run around, like do
Totally.
math class and then run around and then come back, and then we'll do
But
art.
it's also like very much an embodiment of the philosophy itself, right? Like you're trying to, you know, come up with all these insights or wisdom about like how to engage the world and what, you know, what is the meaning of the world. And it's like there's something lacking if you're not putting both your mind and your body in the position to answer that question in the best possible, like affirmative manner that you can, right? Like it's your mind and body. They both have to move through space. They both have to contend with reality. They both have to contend with the chaos of the world and try to turn it into some form of order. And so like I'm fairly critical of like people that are just intellectuals and totally neglect the physical aspect of existence, because not only do I think it's important for moving through life, but as you just said, like I think it delivers a tremendous intellectual boost, you know, whether it's after training or whether it's the humility you derive from it. Like there's so many different ways in which like physical exertion and struggle can amplify or improve your psychological or your intellectual capacity. And so for that reason, and Plato, I believe that was a nickname that meant broad back because he was a wrestler. So I do romanticize about that, but I say all that and thinking it's super important. But then, there are people that like just were so focused on one domain of their character, right? Their intellect or musical prowess, or, savants in whatever category, and even lesser than that. But like artists is a great sort of example. Like they were consumed, they were obsessed by whatever it is that like was in their mind, and they just pursued that with singular focus. Like, body be damned, health be damned, social relationships be damned. Like, I'm just going to become the best fill in the blank composer, artist, whatever. And like, I don't know, not that this is a relevant question, because I obviously have no control over it, but like, I wouldn't want to create a circumstance where that wasn't able to flourish in the world just out of some notion that a certain balance had to be struck. So I think, maybe it's case by case, as we were discussing through this conversation, as you raise your kids, you just kind of put stuff in front of them and you let them dictate to a certain degree. And then I think also, if you're not going to have physical challenges, then I still think you can get, well, you obviously can get challenges in other formats, right? So let's just say it's not going to be physicality, but you could still do a rite of passage in the sense that like, all right, well, like your rite of passage or your kind of coming of age takes a different form, but it's like, it's performing your music to, a certain audience, or it's encountering something that's equally discomfort on whatever plane that you've been kind of practicing on. Maybe that's the proper way to look at it, and not just assume that it has to be physical for everyone. Although my little asterisk is it probably does for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of time, if the endeavor is not a physical endeavor, right? I think there ought to be, or there's a good place for doing something physical. Even will help you in whatever endeavor you're engaged in, right? So like, if I have to do physical work to make what I have work, right? And I feel
Right.
better after I do that physical work. But at some point or another, it's like, okay, I made the swales by hand. I dug trenches for weeks on end. I built fence. I do all this stuff. And then at some point you're gonna go like, well, that work is done. And now I have animals on the land. I've got the food forest is growing. Or there was a physical thing that had to happen before the payoff of the emotional or the intellectual or whatever thing happens. But I think the integrating some sort of physicality into your life, regardless if it has anything to do with whatever your other endeavors are, is going to make all those other endeavors that much better for it, right? Because there are days when like, hey man, I just gotta mow this half of this field. And I have to go out there and I have to spend 6 hours. And it's like, of course, it's on a 90-degree day and the humidity is 90%. And it's like, it's always the shittiest day, right? It's like, I'll give you a good example. It's like every year I have to cut firewood, right? Like I run a wood stove. I don't heat with oil. I don't heat with gas. I heat with wood. And I live in a very cold place in a very old house that's very uninsulated. So it takes a lot of wood, which means it takes a lot of work, right? So it's like, I have to go out and I have to spend weeks in the woods and I have to run a chainsaw and I have to haul this wood out of the woods to where I can get it to a road, where I can get it to where I can get it to my house. And then I have to stack it. They say like cutting firewood heats you 3 times. It heats you when you cut it, it heats you when you stack it, and then it heats you when you burn it, right? So it's like, most people just turn a switch on the wall and it's like, yeah, it's warm now. Like, I'm cold, I just turn this dial. Like for me, I have to go outside with a wheelbarrow when it's -10 and I have to go get the wood, right? Like I have to go outside, and the wood I'm picking up is stuff I cut when it was 90 degrees outside, or I had to pick it up when it was 90 degrees outside. And that shit's not fun. But like, what's awesome? Sitting in my living room with my family and sitting in front of that nice warm wood stove. And it's like, hey, it's winter. We ain't got shit to do except feed the fire, right? Like the work is done, but that was, that's a thing. And when my son got old enough, I was like, hey, buddy, you're going to help me haul brush today, right? It's like, I'm going to cut the trees down. I'm going to cut all the shitty, like the sticks and the twigs. We're not bringing those home, but we got to bring the rest of it home. So I'm going to cut it up, and you're going to take all the stuff that's in the middle of the field. I work with this guy. I clear this field for this guy. So anyway, he says, you cut these trees down, you can have all the wood. You do the work, you get the wood. So it's great. Easy peasy. It's essentially free, right? I mean, monetarily it's free. I just got to do all the work. So I knock the trees down, I limb them out, and then I cut everything, and anything my son can't pick up, I move. But everything he can move, he moves. And it's like, Dad, this sucks. Like, when's lunchtime, right? It's like, not always, but it's like, you sit there, and you know how good a pastrami sandwich tastes at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon when you're sweating your ass off. You know what I mean? It's like, you get, like, I remember the first time I took him out in the woods, and it was like, he's hauling brush the whole day, just dragging limbs into the woods. And he just had this look on his face like, dude, fuck you. And I was like, it's going to be all right. Right. So like, I stopped the saw, and I was like, I'm going to refuel in a minute, but let's have lunch, right? Open up the backpack, pull out the sandwiches. Here's your bottle of water. And the look on that kid's face when he started eating that sandwich was like, are you kidding me? It's like the best thing I've ever eaten in my whole life. It's just a simple pastrami sandwich, right? It's like, but the work that he had to do to get it made that thing that much more awesome. And I think that's what a lot of kids are missing. And I think that's what a lot of adults are missing. It's like, and the payoff, especially like, again, you track it all the way back until wintertime, you've done the work. Now all you gotta do is feed that wood stove. Man, it's nice and warm, and I'm well fed. And I did that, right? I didn't just pay a guy to stick a hose in the back of my house and fill me up with oil, and then I just turned a dial, right? That's easy, right? 78 degrees is awesome when you don't have to pay for it. Like, I mean, you pay for it, but if you can just turn a dial and it's 78, oh, that's awesome. But if you have if you want your house to be 78 degrees and you have to heat that shit with wood, there's a lot more wood to cut. If you want, between 78 and 72 degrees, there's a lot more wood to be cut, right? So like, you got to do the work. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing. And I think in the same regard to not necessarily being a one-to-one with battle or combat or whatever, it's like, you have to do this work, and then you get this reward, but that reward might show up very much later.
Yeah.
Like weeks later, years later, whatever it is. And it's like, you appreciate it.
Well, that's kind of, and I love that example. And I'm smiling when you're telling it, because it's my parents have a cottage, and when I visit home, it's not as they have electric heating, but we still, like, there'll be a couple quarts of wood dropped off by a guy in the area, and we'll stack it, up in part of the driveway, and then we'll bring it down, to put in the fire. And it's not as hardcore as what you described, but it takes, 3 or 4 hours of just kind of doing arm loads and walking it over. And like the beer, after you have like a cold beer after that, and it's like, there's no, like, maybe a beer after a hard workout, it's kind of the same thing, but the principle is like, the reward is better the harder you work for it, right? And also, to your point about like how far you can hold off on the gratification, I mean, there's a very kind of biblical principle there, which is like, how much can you give and how long can you wait to prolong the reward? And like, and Jordan Peterson talks about this kind of thing all the time, but if like you maximize both of them out, that's probably what you should strive to do, and that may be what delivers the most satisfying experience of life to you, even if it's hard to connect the dots in the moment that you're doing it. It takes a certain maturity to approach it that way, of course.
Absolutely. And I think the earlier you can instill that in young people, the better off that they're going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. And, which is why, like, I think again, whether it's combat or whether it's these kind of sort of physical measures, it's great to have them as part of, kids' development. And also, like, back to the point, we live in a physical world, right? And so the degree to which you can enhance your capacity to engage in that physical world is most often going to be beneficial in some capacity. And which is why, like, anyone who's ever done weight training or, worked out or become stronger physically in some sense, like, it's not just like the endorphins you get afterwards. It's not just how your body shape changes and maybe you're more satisfied with it, but it's like you feel a greater capacity to engage the world, right? Because things that are heavy are less heavy now, right? Like you can literally move more of the world as a result of how you've trained yourself. And that might seem like a minor thing to many people, and in the modern world it probably is minor and insignificant, but it's still like it's that thing that we were talking about earlier. It's still sending that signal to you, like that signal of agency and that signal of conforming and integrating to the truth or the forces of the world, right? And trying to find that harmony or synthesis between the two. Like there's a touch of that there, and that maybe that's the signal that breaks through, that makes us feel, that it gives us that added sense of confidence, of freedom, of capacity.
Absolutely. I think it also, by knowing that you can, if you've done it once, then you can probably do it again, right? And so you take on a challenge that you're not sure you could take on, and then you struggle through that task. And I always do, like in my family, we do these weird, I don't know, I'm not going to call them stupid because they're just some of the most incredible moments in my life. We do these crazy challenges, right? So like a couple of years back, I grew these insane hot peppers, right? It's like ghost peppers, like these.
Fuck that.
I mean,
Fuck that.
it's
I know where you're going with this. I think I'm not down.
So I said, hey guys, family challenge, right? Here's what it is this year. This is, and I get to come up with it because I'm that asshole, right? So it's like, and I've got like at this point, 9 and 10-year-old or something like that. I'm like, here's the deal, we're gonna play a game, and we're gonna cover up these peppers. I had ghost peppers, scorpion peppers. I mean, I grew like all the evil peppers that you can grow, right? And I kind of put them all under like little cups, and it's like, all right, we're gonna play a game. And if you want to participate, you participate. If you don't want to, but here's the rules: you got to chew the pepper, you got to chew the whole pepper, you got to swallow it, and you just gotta fucking do it, right? And I was like, and it can't kill them, right? So it's like they're not gonna die, and like I know my kids are tough, and it's like let's see if we can do this. And I'm not even sure I can do this, right? So I'm like, I got a 9 and 10-year-old kid that are looking at me like, are you fucking sure, dude? I'm like, I'm not sure, but I know that we can't die, so let's give it a whack. And they were like on board, because it's like, hey dad, I kind of trust you that, like, what's the worst that could happen? Well, the worst that could happen is like, whatever what are you gonna do? Throw
extreme
up?
pain.
Like, yeah, this is gonna
suck.
This is gonna suck for a minute, right? It's like let's see what happens. But like, they'd had some hot pepper. I mixed some of that stuff in some. They're used to spicy food, but I was like, let's see what happens. And we play our little game, and then everybody gets their pepper, and it turns out that like the middle kid gets like the biggest pepper, and everybody's looking like, oh man, you're fucked, right? But the biggest pepper doesn't mean it's the worst pepper. And okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Boom, everybody in. Chew, 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 chew. You gotta chew for like 10 seconds or whatever. Swallow. And then everybody at the tables, everybody's face lights up like, why the fuck did you do this to us, Dad? I fucking hate you. But dude, they toughed it out. Like, that was the amazing thing about it. I kind of thought like everybody's gonna be running around screaming, crying for the milk and all this other whatnot. I was like, they just toughed it out. And it was like, it wasn't exactly the most pleasant thing. Everybody's sitting there, shit. It's like the first time I heard my kids swear the first time, you know what I mean? It's like, I know you swear when I'm not around, but like, this kid's like, God damn it, Dad, what the fuck? I'm like, you're gonna be all right. We sat there, we kind of like cheered each other through it, and then finally it dissipates. But what you get after it is probably the same thing that you get after like a hard workout or like doing anything that's difficult. Is like you get that almost like euphoria where you go, hey man, I don't give a shit what you throw at me right now. I'm loving life, right?
Yeah.
And it's like whether it's crazy exercise or it's like a physical anything, everything, or like a near-death experience, right? Like I don't know if you've ever had a near-death experience, but like if you almost die, you feel pretty calm about the world the next day. So it's like I've had a few, and it's like not fun at the moment that it's happening, but like you go like, oh wait a minute, I'm not gonna the part where I get eaten by the shark's over, and now I can think about life a little differently. But it's like this euphoric thing. It's like, holy shit, that almost happened. That scenario, that could have been it, right? So it's like you get a new like appreciation for life.
Yeah, well, I mean, it puts things into perspective, one, and two, it makes your baseline like neutral seem way more like positive, right? Like
Right.
like if you're experiencing pain, right? Like if I just we're just hanging around chatting and I do something to you that hurts you, when I stop doing it, that's a relief, even though you're only going back to the place you were whenever prior to me doing whatever I was doing, right? So it's like you weren't experiencing that sense of relief prior, but because of the introduction of the pain, because of the introduction of the challenge, going back to neutral is actually incredibly positive. And there's many ways to do that. Chewing super hot peppers is definitely one of them. But one of the things that gets mentioned a lot these days, and I think it's good, is like, because there's so many mental health issues in this generation, and so many people, and we have a culture of just like, going to the doctor, and of course another authority figure who've been trained to just say yes, 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 of course sir, tell me the truth. They say, well, take this pill. And so people take this pill. And of course, like now a huge portion of the population is medicated in that way. And all before saying like, well, how's your sleep? And did you do 20 hill sprints in like the hot noon sun today? Before, like, and did you do all these things to
Right.
see if that would help ameliorate, how you were thinking and how you're feeling about things? And of course, 99% of the time, the answer is no, because the easy option was taken as the first option. But, that's what we're talking about, right? Like your modern culture has put us in a situation where the formerly unavoidable challenges of life have been made avoidable, right? And so now it's kind of
Right.
like you have to intentionally introduce them into your life. And we maybe like they were gotten rid of simply thinking that they were only a negative. Like surely we want to make every single aspect of life more convenient, when that, I think, is the deceit. We've failed to appreciate the necessity and the benefit of challenge, rather than just seeking to eradicate it entirely. Or instead, we've sought to eradicate it entirely. And to the extent that we've been successful, in a certain sense, it's been detrimental. And so I think there is definitely a resurgence happening now of appreciation for that. And there's all sorts of different people talking about it, and it's starting to emerge again in the culture. And I think it's great because, like, again, we are witnessing the detrimental effects of that process having taken place. And now there's like a course correction happening, as far as I can tell. Like people, these conversations are happening and people are realizing like, oh shit, like, no, we went way too far in that direction. We got to bring it back. And, we're not going to go back in certain technological senses, but we can certainly be more thoughtful about like how we piece together the constituents that foster like a strong character and a meaningful life. And that seems to be what we're doing when we have these conversations and all the other ones that are happening out in the culture. And like, yeah, that's a very important conversation to have. And it's a very important experimentation to conduct on an individual level. Cause like you can gain information and like, potentials outside of yourself, but the only one who can determine it is for you, so it's not going to be because I said, combat sports are good, or you said that chewing chilies is good or whatever. Like maybe you should try them. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. But the punchline is like, you've got to find a way to introduce them in something into your life that's going to deliver that same effect, lest you just become, complacent or nihilistic or numb or apathetic or all those, sorts of mindsets or conditions that beset so many people in modern life.
Absolutely. It's like what is it? Fear is the mind killer, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
so many, you can be afraid of, like, okay, so when the kids are little, it's like, oh, you have to get a shot, right? It's like, you're little and I don't want you to die from tetanus. So, at least on this level, like you're gonna have to take this one, right? It's like, but there's a way to go about that, right? And like you can say, hey little guy, it's gonna hurt for a second, but don't worry, I got your back. And when you're done, we're good to go, and we'll get out of here, and we'll move on with life, right? Like this is gonna suck for a second, but you'll be okay. As opposed to what a lot of kids, and I've got family that works in healthcare, you've got kids that are so afraid to engage with, even if they need a blood draw or whatever it is,
they don't want to put on the blood pressure cuff, right? They're like, I'm afraid, I'm scared. And then you have a parent sitting there going, it's okay to be afraid. We don't have to do this right now. Like, we can come back another day. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about, lady? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's a blood pressure cuff. Like, I'm not telling anybody how to run their medical life, but I mean, if you've got your kid so racked up about some nonsense like a blood pressure cuff, or like, hey man, this is going to be uncomfortable for a half a second, but you're going to be okay. If your kid's that messed up about something that simple, like, the world is going to eat them alive. And then when you have a good majority, I don't even know if I want to say a good majority, but when you've got a lot of kids that are that soft, you have a lot, they grow up to be adults that are that soft, you know? I mean, my kids are not picky eaters, because I was like, here's your food. When you finish this food, then there'll be dessert, right? And it's like, great. So I got to eat this thing I don't want to eat, and then I'll eat it, and then I'll get dessert. And it turns out that after like doing that a few times, they kind of like the thing you gave them.
Right.
And again, you learn, right? You're like, okay, you like this, but kids fucking hate turnips. All right. I've tried it 3 times. It's not happening. I don't even like turnips. We all gave it a good whack. Sorry, it's not happening. Sorry, turnip, it's just not for you. You know, it's like, but you know, you got to try it. And I'll sit there and I'll shovel that shit in my face too and be like, yeah, you know what? I agree. This sucks. But like, we tried, right? Like, I'll suffer through it with you, and then we'll get through this. And then, like, you know, we can at least say that's definitely like, I don't like that shit. But you know, my kids went outside today, harvested apples, stopped at the green beans, ate a bunch of green beans raw. You know, they eat all kinds of, I don't even know what half the shit they eat out there. It's like, they come back and it's like, your belly is full. What did you eat? And they're like, we were out in the garden, just eating everything. It's like, great. Make them appreciate the food stuff, right? But like, if nobody said like, hey, this is a cucumber, this is a green bean, this is a squash, this is a tomato, right? One of my kids loves tomatoes, the other one not so much. But if you never put it in front of them and say, hey, give it a shot, how are they going to know? Right? It's the same thing with everything else in life. It's like, if you don't try it, if nobody encourages you to try a new thing, or to suffer through a thing that you don't necessarily want to have to do, but it's quite frankly for your own good, you know, where are you when you're 30 years old? You're like, you're afraid to go places. You're afraid to do things. I saw an adult woman wearing a gas mask in a fucking Ford Escort, whatever the hell that thing, you know what I mean? Like, with the windows rolled, there was no one else in the car. And I'm like, what are you doing? It's like, you're the only person in the car. And like, I mean, it's like the middle of the summer, everything's rolled up. It's just like a gas mask, not like, you know, she was wearing a full on respirator. And I'm like, who told you were that weak? You know what I mean? Like, you're tougher than this, lady. You got to get your shit together. And it's like, you've got people like falling off the rails all over the place. And
well, this is why,
maddening. But they never bumped up against a hard edge in their life. And then you go like, oh, that's why you're here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why we're here as a culture, right? That's like something like the last 2 years can even happen. It's not because like all the reasons that you know, the mainstream would have you believe. It's like, you know, it's just this circumstance encountering an extremely soft, fearful, uninformed, immature, many other pejoratives perhaps, population, you know, as a result of these themes that we've been discussing, you know, coming together and being the forces that have molded the generation of people that's around today. And so like a lot of the crazy shit we see in the world is because of that. And you know, I think what we've been discussing is that Bitcoin and permaculture and homeschooling and stuff is our forces, and our responses to that effectively are saying like, oh, like the money has gone off the rails, the education's gone off the rails, the food's gone off the rails, the personal development's gone off the rails. What are the things that have to be done to bring it back into alignment, right? To bring it back into integration with more natural or fundamental principles. And I think that's what's happening. And it's so cool to see, because, you know, for a while prior to all this, like I was in a position where like I didn't see how that would be turned around. I didn't see how it really could be. You know, there was bright spots and stuff, of course, but I didn't see how en masse it could get turned around. And now I do. And it's, you know, it's incredibly exciting. And I'm just thinking now, I do want to have that psychedelic discussion with you, but my brain's kind of turning to mush now. So maybe we put a pin in this one, and we'll fire it up again. We'll sort it out, but maybe in like 2 or 3 weeks, we'll we'll do another one, because I feel like we're probably going to spend a little time on that subject, and I don't want to rush through it. So let's shut it down today. Man, this has been super fun. I really appreciate you taking the time and being so open about sharing your experiences. I think it's awesome. Basically, the life you're leading, what you're doing with the farm and how you're raising your kids and your perspective on things is super refreshing and inspiring to hear. So I appreciate the time and the conversation.
I certainly do as well. It was funny when you would put out a post something like, anybody want to talk shit about some shit? And I was like, I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm not normally that person. I'm not normally like that. I'll reach out and I'll try to, I don't like to necessarily throw myself out there because I kind of try to keep things private, but
Right.
At some point or another, you kind of have to say, well, maybe I'm sitting on something that somebody else needs to hear or maybe wants to hear. Right. And like a lot of these things, even in this conversation, I put some stuff together in my own life where I'm like, oh shit, that relates to that, and that relates to that, and that relates to that. Well, maybe there's more people out there that are doing that exact thing, right? They're seeing the way the world goes and they go, huh, I can do this other thing. I can do what everybody else is doing, or I can try something else. And if anything that we discussed today helped to maybe motivate or, get somebody thinking about, hey, well, who says I have to do it that way? Fuck it, I'm going to do it my own way. Do it. Go out there, try that shit, see what happens. And if you fail, pick your ass up, get out there and try it again tomorrow. And then, take it from there. Right. And so I appreciate your time. And I certainly thank you for all of this. It was awesome. That was a very quick 3 hour. Holy shit, 3 hours, really?
Well, I think the next time I do a tweet out like that, I'm going to use your terminology and just tweet, does anybody want to talk some shit about some shit? And we'll see what kind of responses I get back. But yeah, man, I'm sure that a lot of people are going to appreciate the perspective that you've shared in this conversation. So thanks again. And I'll hit you up after this and we'll sort out a round 2, because I definitely want to continue the conversation.
Awesome. All right. I appreciate it, John.
All right, brother. Take care.
Take care.